make sure, stop by the cPanel booth. Thanks for cPanel for supporting us and making sure that this conference happens. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Alin, who I inaccurately reported works for Sony. I knew he didn't. As soon as I said it, my brain went, he works with the free Xperia team and does a lot of development with CM-based ROMs for a lot of Sony devices. So with that, his session is going to be very much about interaction. So the more you ask questions, the better the session will be. So let's give it up for Alin.
Hi all, it's a real pleasure being today with you. My name is Alin Jerpelea. I'm working with XDA since 2005, and I started working with Android devices since Android 0.8. Today I want to have a talk with you from ROM developer to ROM developer, because we have now a lot of legacy devices that are not suited for latest Android version. Even Android has now minimum system requirements. I don't know if any of you has thought about a phone like it was a PC. It has the same components. It has a CPU and GPU, memory, storage, display, and input-output devices, sensors, touchscreen, everything. On a PC, you go and buy hardware. After 6 months, you start upgrading something. Then you get a new, let's say, Windows version. You will increase your hard drive, you will change your CPU. But on Android device or on a phone, you can not increase almost anything. In the beginning of XDA, we tried soldering or desoldering and resoldering different RAM modules. We tried upgrading the storage of those devices because we wanted a better device. It happened on first HTC devices. But it's not an option for an end user. So, what do you think about computers and phones? Are they similar or not? Good. So, those are similar, but we cannot upgrade our phones hardware-wise. Now, a question, because they are similar. Can you run Linux on a Pentium 1 with 32 megabytes of RAM?
Hell yes.
Yes, but you have to be very patient. Okay, we have legacy hardware, which is missing a lot of hardware features for new Android versions. Manufacturers, and here I'm speaking about Qualcomm, Nvidia, and all SOC manufacturers are not offering support for those devices, and we do not have new libraries. But we know this platform, and at least in theory we can rewrite drivers for them from scratch, in theory, because there is no documentation. Also, on existing Android versions, those devices are almost bug-free, because in time we solved most of the problems. As I said, there is no minimum hardware requirement on Android written down by Google or by somebody else. But do we have a minimum hardware requirement, or we can try to push the limit? This is the question. And here I'm waiting an answer from you. Do you think that we can have Android running on almost every hardware, let's say even on G1, latest Android 4.3. Yeah, it's slow. It's really slow. Here is a snapshot of how is the Android distribution in March 2013. Having all Android distributions that are out there. As we can see, we have most of devices on Gingerbread still. Gingerbread that it's really old. But most of those hardware is not suitable for new distributions, and also it's not capable of running all new features implemented by Ice Cream Sandwich or Jelly Bean. Every new version of Android added something new for making device work better or faster, or simply adding some features that require hardware. And now comes, at least on XDA, are Lego developers. Lego developers take an image that was built for another device, mix libraries from other devices, unknown, and usually they get a system that it's running. It's running, at least it's booting. After that, they publish this Android distribution on XDA, and users are happy because they have the latest version. With some small complaints, device is stable but reboots only 3 times a day. It's a little bit slower, sometimes it freezes, but they have the latest version because of those Lego developers. This creates pressure on us, developers, that don't want to support legacy devices on new Android versions. And users get frustrated. They usually say, you're like OEMs, you're like Sony, you're like Samsung. You don't want to support all devices. The question is, should we, developers, because here in this room we have ROM developers and application developers, spend time on devices that anyway die, or we should focus on fixing bugs and move over?
Do what you can and move on.
Exactly my point.
You know, I've sometimes wondered if it would be possible to get the manufacturers of the chips to support, like, you know, the x86 to support it. And you can compile the latest software for any Linux distribution.
Yes, but if you look on Qualcomm, you will see that there is no support for legacy devices. I remember that I spent almost 9 months porting, actually doing a bring up on Sony X10 on Android 2.3. And it was slow, but I wanted to do it, even Qualcomm didn't support it. So no, I will not repeat that mistake, at least not me and my team. Looking on XDA posts for ROMs that are done by Lego developers for legacy devices, usually I could see complaints about slow UI, which is normal. Device does not have a powerful enough GPU, or simply misses functions in the video libraries. It's slowing games, which is normal because new games require more graphic power and more powerful processors. There is no multitasking because those legacy devices have low RAM. Even if a device has 500 megabytes of RAM, it's not enough to have multitasking. And another thing, it's low free RAM. Users usually complain that they look on free RAM and it's low. We all know that free RAM is wasted RAM in Android, and killing applications does nothing. You will just get more RAM and a slower device.
There's two parts of the story. Number one, in developing countries, you still see people running Cupcake, which is ancient, but in most of the world, you see people running Jelly Bean, or even, well, Gingerbread or higher, I should say. So when do you cut it off? I've seen phones with 128 megs of RAM, and I've seen phones with 2 gigs of RAM, so it's kind of a tough one. Somebody asked me last week to put Jelly Bean on their G1. It just wasn't worth it.
Yeah, but I'm thinking that we should unite it on XDA. If we decide some minimum system requirements for, let's say, a specific device or a specific Android version, then we all should stick to that. Because unless somebody will release a Lego ROM, there will be no ROM for that device.
I completely agree. There has to be a point where you say, this phone's, kind of on its deathbed.
Yeah, also you have to think about application compatibility. There are some applications built for Gingerbread, and if you try to run them from market on ice cream, will not run or will crash. And then you will be blamed, or I will be blamed, because I did this mistake.
And also screen resolution and just lack of certain hardware sensors, which are needed by some applications.
With legacy devices, something like, for example, I used to be a Droid Pro user up until almost maybe 2 weeks ago. And what we have to do for people that are stuck with that phone, maybe they're on what I was on, maybe they're on Page Plus, they do 3G only devices, maybe that's all the money they have is for a cheap used phone. I bought my Droid Pro for $36. It was a good phone for a while. So what we need to do, and what we can do, what we have to offer them, not necessarily only what we have to offer, but what we have to offer them is this. If we can get Gingerbread on a device, because Gingerbread is at least fairly compatible enough for everyday applications, that means your dialer, your calculators, your light web browsing, maybe a few apps here and there, what you need for a functional, working, usable device, if we can give them a stable, or at least as close to stable as possible, Gingerbread port, then the compatibility window isn't so bad. You're never going to get a all the 1.x devices to work on Gingerbread or hell, even Froyo. It's not going to happen. It won't. The hardware's not there. There's a point where they have to get another used device. A half a gig of RAM on a phone will work. It's a tight pinch. I ran the Droid Pro on 50 to 60 megs free every single day. And I did it, and it did work. I even had working GPS. And it functioned well. So if you want to classify something as a legacy device, on bare minimum compatibility, you're looking at Android 2.3 Gingerbread, an ARM v7 chip, because ARM v6 at this point is just too old to support. Hardly anything works on ARM v6 at this point anyway. So it's ARM v7, half a gig of RAM, enough storage, minimum built into the device to house a ROM and the basic functional apps. We need good stable support for the SD card slots on these phones though, because for the longest time, like for example on my Droid Pro I had to run CM7. On the Droid X, I believe, or one of the other devices close to it in that family, there was a problem with it dropping the SD card a lot, and you need that storage very badly on a device like that. So maybe on the odds and ends and the stability bugs on 2.3, we can give them that. But we're not going to be able to give them 4.x. It's not going to happen. It doesn't work.
We are discussing even about 4.0. Users are starting now to ask for 4.3, 2 and 3.
It'll never happen.
On 500 megabytes RAM.
You can barely do it on a gig of RAM. It won't happen.
But some Lego developers did it. And
you're running broken software. It doesn't work.
Yes.
That's the thing. You leave them with 2.3, a stable build. If they want more, they've got to get another device. That's all we can do. We don't have anything better to offer.
I see the whole picture. I have 26 devices from 2010 up to date, running different Android versions. Even 4.3 runs now on Z. But I cannot offer this for legacy devices.
We can't do it.
We have
Devs can't do
to
it.
get a minimum system requirement, at least internally on XDA, for every Android version. And
Let's-
stick to that.
I say we do it, and I say we take our devices that run stable and run well, make a version table and a requirements table based on how well they work and what versions they work on, and even some of the basic software. Put the list together, put it up there, put it at minimum requirements for your device, look here first, if it's not here, don't ask.
Yeah.
That's it. There's only so much we can afford to offer.
This should be good, and Jeremy should arrange this so that we can have a guideline for small developers. Also, having Lego developers releasing things like this creates pressure over OEMs. It's not their fault that soft developers don't support those devices anymore.
If we're gonna get, no, it's not, and I mean, you know, people cry Motorola abandoned us, these people abandoned us, and we already, the developers already give them more support out of the box anyway than they were already getting. They're already on borrowed time at that point to begin with.
Yeah.
There's a point when that time does run out. You know, and I, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of people in here that are all for a minimum requirements list, and it's just about putting it out there and organizing it. I mean, you know, and anything that's a, you know, a quote unquote Lego ROM, that's a hacked up, screwed up ROM. It should be in a disclaimered section on the forms that they're going to release, and that they are not to ask for support from any of the developers except the original dev of that ROM, because that's taking time away from devs that need to be able to develop their software and their ROMs for devices that need it badly already as it is.
Yeah, but I see lots of complaints that we are spending time on new devices instead of doing bring-ups for legacy devices.
If people want to develop for legacy, they can decide to do so, but we can't have current devs that are wanting to develop with current software for current devices be forced to do everything. It's not going to happen. And I'm sure that if people need it and want it bad enough, there will be more legacy devs that come out of the woodwork and devote their time to try to keep some of these older devices going, if they so choose. But it's not going to be on 4. You know, the newest 4.x series. It's not going to happen. It just won't be there. People can complain all day and all night, but that won't change things.
Yeah, but this creates pressure when they complain.
We do what we can. That's what we can do. It's not necessarily that it's all that we can do. It's we do what we can. We have to offer what we have to offer. They can take what they can get, and you know, if they want more, then you know they can either A, learn themselves, or B, you know, we can push the used device market. If you know, I don't know everything that XDA has to offer, but if there's, you know, a good used device market, let's push that. Phone swap, trades, you know.
Swap up.
You know, what I've seen a lot of the times when working with devices, even new devices, you'll see old versions of the kernel or new versions of the kernel, and there is no real unified way to say this version of this kernel is supposed to run this version of Android. I think if Google would specify, say, an array of kernel tests that would certify this version of the kernel for Android, like everything they need for the base for Android to run, then it would be a lot more simple for people to say, okay, we're going to port the 3.8 kernel over to Android, and that's going to run Jelly Bean, or you know, the device runs too slow for the standards. What we really need is we need some kind of a centralized authority for this kind of thing. Otherwise, it's just a developer being a dick.
In my opinion, what Microsoft did and was blamed, because yeah, it's Microsoft, they set a minimum system requirement. On every operating system that they released, we have a minimum system requirement. If you're below that, don't try. If you're on that, you have to be patient. It will run, but slow. Google says nothing. So users think that Android 4.3 and 5 will run on 2010 device because they bought it, because they love it. But let's face it, it's ancient.
Yeah, basically, what it says, one possible way to look at it would be after, say, a phone is about 3 years old, kind of start shifting the focus from using it as a phone, because at that point, no one's really going to want to use it as a phone, but start looking into repurposing it as a second life as a non-phone device for things that would be handy to have, a touchscreen device laying around, that you could have a dozen of laying around your house for different, single-purpose tasks. That would be cost insane to go out and actually buy dedicated devices for. But if you've got a bucket of old phones that, sitting in a drawer doing nothing anyway, at that point, yeah, you can justify, having IP remote controls, laying around the living room, and just seem obvious.
Yeah, but we cannot tell this to our users.
I was looking at the Android x86 stuff, and some people challenged me to try to set that up. And one of the things I learned was I spent an awful lot of time trying to figure out which apps were compatible on which version of the build. And I think it's been alluded to here, having a list of apps. But the list of apps can be a huge time saver where if you have a working configuration of a ROM or a device, which on Android x86 they have an actual device list for each of their builds so that they know which device is compatible and what some of the issues might be. But they don't have a list of apps, so I posted on their forum to add a list of apps for each of those. Whereas, like you were saying about repurposing, that's a great idea. And you could take an apps list and say, well, this device with this ROM has been tested on 3 or 4 of these, apps that pretty much everybody might want to use for something, like a wireless browser or something. And at least then at that point, the time would be saved by people that are trying to use it. And suddenly, as a user comes up and complains, you can say, well, maybe Google has a minimum standard list for hardware, but on the other hand, here's what we've tested as software that are apps that work halfway reasonably or even just don't crash. And that's going to save people a lot of time and maybe set some expectations so that they don't just assume that their latest map GPS program is going to work. But I think that an app list plays a key role in this discussion because that's what users are going to be complaining that their app isn't running.
Yeah, but this problem can be easily solved by Google, at least in my opinion, if they set an application version compatible with which Android version. When you download it from market, you don't know if it was built for Android 1.6 or 4.3.
I agree.
You really don't know. You have to test it. If it crashes, this is life.
But part of the forum, I totally agree. Part of the forum can be to just inform people of what it's been run against and what it works against.
Yeah, but you cannot test 2 million of apps.
No, but the ones that your point was earlier that, and I've heard this exact argument that there's all these 1.5 devices in India, for example, and over there the commodity is the number of people that have a phone device because if somebody can write an app on 1.5, then they can push it out to 2,000 salesmen who can just use it to do really basic web browsing tasks.
Yeah.
And so they want to write these apps. Well, okay, so there are millions of people potentially that can use all this old equipment. So I don't think necessarily we should turn them away, but just having the ability, like you said, if Google published it, but it doesn't always have to just be Google. If somebody published here's what does work, and as a time saver in the least, or as maybe a minimum requirements, or maybe as a minimum tested type of, okay, this is what we've tested, and these are some minimal apps. Then at least it gets to that point where if somebody sees an app that they like and it's comparable to one of the other ones, they can test their app, add it to the list, and if it doesn't, maybe use one of the ones that's already on the list. I don't know, it's just, I just toss that up because I spend an awful lot of time testing different apps. And
It's an idea, but think it like this. When an OEM released an shipped software of Android 1.5 or 6, we on XDA released 2.1. And we stopped there because simply there is no library compatibility with newer versions. And that's it. We can test some of the apps that work on that device, but we cannot offer, let's say, Instagram for that version. And users simply start pushing that application on phone and complain that the phone is not working with Instagram, fix it. It's not our fault.
I know we've talked a lot about minimum requirements and things here, but I like the fact that Android doesn't have any minimum requirements because it's like Linux. I mean, I think it was sometime last year or Christmas time that they finally dumped the 486 code, but I mean 486 is 20 years old at this point that you could run Linux on still today. And Android, I kind of look at the same thing, like 4.3, if you wanted to, you could run it on a G1, you could run it on a Hero C. I know I had my Hero C for over 3 years, and that was my primary phone. I finally got rid of it, and I didn't know what I was missing out on. But I had 4.1 running on the thing, and it ran pretty good. Everything worked. Video camera, and it wasn't that slow.
Everything worked till you started some heavy applications.
Well, but I mean, like, my point is, though, that it leaves the door open for developers. I understand the users complain and that complaints, but I just mean on the developer side of things, that if someone wants to take, a Hero C, if they want to take an original Evo, or any phone that's, coming up on 2.5, 3 years old, that, is really just out of the market completely now. If you start turning people away just on the front end, then you're not going to get any developers at all on these old devices that even some people still use because, like some of those talk, they're on Straight Talk or different mobile networks that are prepaid networks, 3G only networks, where you have a limited selection of devices. You see it on television, there's advertisements for walking to Walmart and get your $25 a month plan with the Samsung Galaxy. That's a pretty old phone at this point.
Yes, but you should stick to an older Android instead of trying to run 4.2 on that device.
But I guess my point is,
It
though,
will be faster.
but if you want 4.2, you can make it happen. It's like, and I don't think we should turn people away from any sort of more modern Android if they want it. If the camera doesn't work, the camera's not going to work, and they need to accept that. But if everything else works except for the camera, or if
We shouldn't provide Android releases, Android ROMs that are incomplete, and we know that we cannot fix them. Our goal should be to provide ROMs that are stable and good for daily use.
I agree with that, and I'm all for being source-built ROMs. I don't like the Lego thing we were talking about. We're taking a bunch of blobs around from different devices, and I'm all for getting as much source as possible and getting stability. But if you can have 4.2 or 4.1 or 4.0 or anything on a Gingerbread device or a donut device, and it mostly works, as far as on the developer side of things, I'm happy with that. I think that's great that we see an old device running something more modern.
Along the same lines as what he was just saying, and the gentleman behind me was saying, the good thing about Android is that, after it's done doing its job as a phone, a lot of the times if you can't get the drivers working for phones, then you can port Android and just use it as a media player or remote control for your XBMC media center, or just a streaming device to hook up to your Jinx box or just about any other device you have out there, the Chromecast or whatnot. You don't have to get all the features working, like 10 or 2 devices. Those things will never get camera working, they'll never get GPS working, but they still work fine as an MP3 player.
But not on latest Android.
I forget the latest Android running on it.
Yeah. Somebody else?
I think it's one important question is to ask users why they really want the latest Android, because I can see several possibilities. One, just to say, yes, I have the newest, and that's it. They don't really use it. They play Angry Birds, which they can play on Gingerbread, but they don't really need it. Then there might be cases, like a second case, when actually they need an application which needs a new API. And basically that's the use case which I could understand. If, I don't know, API level 18 introduce something useful, one application relies on that, and the hardware can keep running it, then it makes sense. But then the third thing is that maybe some users actually want a new feature in Android, but they don't realize that it's hardware dependent. For example, Miracast. Android 4.2, I think, introduced Miracast support, Wi-Fi display. Some phones simply don't have the hardware or the power to actually use it. So if someone wants Android 4.2 for the Miracast, he can't get it working on a 2-year-old hardware anyway. So it would be really useful if the users would actually understand why they want to upgrade and then complain or decide or whatever.
It sounds like you're suggesting more like an Android advisory group, because that's the whole point of Android. We don't want to tell people what they can and can't do. If you want to try it, try it. We do want to suggest what they maybe should and shouldn't try, because from our significant experience, we know, no, you're not going to run the latest and greatest flight sim on your old HTC Hero. It's just not going to work. It'd be funny to watch you try it. But setting up, it makes me think of IEEE working groups, just a group of experts who put out a bunch of suggestions, and they work through it professionally, because they know the subject matter. And I just wrote up something simple here, like defining classes of phones. You put a phone in a class. You write an app and you say, this is the class of phone I suggested for. A remote control app, legacy phone. It'll run on anything. An IR remote, well, you need a phone that's going to have an IR blaster. So the latest and greatest, forefront class. Just simple categorization to give a user an expectation of what their experience is going to be, both for an app, a phone, and a ROM, because they're all interrelated.
This is true, but as an example, us, the Xperia team, we work only on Sony devices, and we tested several boards, several generations, and we decided some devices that are under minimum specification will not get this specific Android version because it's too slow, or not all features can be provided. But on XDA we have all manufacturers, we have all Android hardware versions, and all hardware versions, and all Android versions. So it's very hard to just speak with everybody that is creating a custom ROM. We have to think on a way of guiding them or decide for them.
I place that responsibility on the author. They publish the ROM, they should put, under the group's suggestions, this is where I think it falls. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but that's the whole point. It's up to the user.
Yeah, but this creates pressure over the other developers. And this is my point, because daily I get my mailbox full of requests of porting new Android versions on legacy devices.
Can't do much about your emails.
I know.
They're going to keep coming.
Last question.
I agree with your point. You need to set up a table for developers to follow. And you could get everybody in this room to agree to that table that you set up, but you're more or less throwing down a gauntlet for some young hotshot thief to come out there and say, I'm going to beat that table, I'm going to make it work, and you're just never going to stop that. It's just inevitable.
Fine, well, people do what they want to do, what they can do.
Exactly. There's no stopping it. They said it couldn't be done, I got it working. You're just putting out the challenges for these hotshots to come out.
Yeah, but we can create some guidelines, and if they don't want to follow them, it's their problem.
Exactly.
I agree
But
to that.
for the moment, there is no guideline.
So let's make them.
Other than what the manufacturer said by them not upgrading the devices because they consider it not being able to run.
It's not always true. At least one version over the release version, it's working, and it's fully working.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks a lot, that was great.